A girl vanished at school, and 3 years later her mother zoomed in on Google Street View and saw something unbelievable. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Beyoncé's voice filled the small kitchen as Tamara Johnson whisked chocolate chips into the pancake batter, her hips swaying gently to the rhythm. 6-year-old Melody, perched on a stool at the counter, giggled at her mother's dance moves, the bright pink coat she refused to remove even indoors, slipping off one shoulder. "Mom, you're silly," Melody said, reaching for a chocolate chip that had escaped the bowl. Tamara smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "And you, Miss Melody, are going to be late for school if you don't finish your breakfast." She poured the batter onto the sizzling pan, forming a perfect circle. Morning sunlight streamed through the apartment windows, reflecting off Lake Michigan in the distance. Their cozy 2-bedroom in Deerfield was modest but warm, filled with books and the artwork Melody brought home from Wilmot Elementary each week. Tamara cherished these quiet Tuesday mornings. Her late start at Northwestern's library meant they could enjoy breakfast together without rushing. In the living room, Tamara knelt behind Melody, carefully sectioning her daughter's hair for braids. Melody clutched her pencil case decorated with galloping horses, chattering about the class field trip planned for the following week. "Ms. Peterson says we might get to pet real horses at the farm," Melody said, her excitement making it difficult to sit still. "Do you think they'll let me feed them?" "I'm sure they will," Tamara replied, securing a colorful elastic at the end of a neat braid. "You'll be the horse whisperer of Wilmot Elementary." At the school entrance, children streamed past them toward the playground. Tamara adjusted Melody's pink coat, checking that her lunch was secure in her backpack. "Have a wonderful day, sweetheart. I'll see you after your after-school program, okay?" Tamara pressed a kiss to Melody's forehead. "Bye, Mom," Melody called, already running toward a group of friends by the swings, her pink coat vivid against the autumn playground. Tamara watched until Melody disappeared into the crowd of children before walking back to her car. She had no way of knowing this ordinary goodbye would haunt her for years to come. Later that afternoon, Tamara stood before her colleagues in the university library's conference room, pointing to a slide about digital archiving innovations. Her presentation was going well. The department head had even nodded approvingly at her proposal for expanding the rare manuscript collection's online accessibility. When her phone vibrated for the third time in her blazer pocket, Tamara apologized and glanced at the screen. The school's number flashed insistently. A cold weight settled in her stomach as she stepped into the hallway to answer. "Ms. Johnson," the school coordinator's voice was unnaturally controlled, "I regret to inform you that we cannot locate Melody after class." The world tilted on its axis. "What do you mean, cannot locate?" Tamara's voice rose sharply. "She's supposed to be in the after-school program. She never arrived. We've searched the entire building." 20 minutes later, Tamara's heels echoed through Wilmot Elementary's empty corridors as she ran from classroom to classroom, calling Melody's name. The principal led her to the security office, where a stone-faced guard rewound surveillance footage. "There," the guard pointed to a timestamp, 3:17 p.m. "She exits through the side gate. But the van picks them up at the front," Tamara whispered, leaning closer to the grainy image of her daughter, walking alone toward the side exit. Outside, Tamara approached the after-school program van still parked across the street. The driver shook his head, showing her the attendance sheet with Melody's name circled in red, absent. As twilight descended, police officers spread across the playground and surrounding streets. Tamara stood in the school's entrance, making frantic calls to neighbors and Melody's friends' parents. None had seen her daughter. A Latino man in his 40s approached, extending his hand. "Detective Marcus Rivera, Ms. Johnson. I'll be leading this investigation." His voice was steady, his eyes sharp and assessing. "We'll find your daughter." As night fell, Tamara sat alone in Melody's bedroom, clutching the worn teddy bear her daughter couldn't sleep without. In the living room, she could hear Rivera questioning other officers in low tones. She pressed her face into the bear's fur, inhaling Melody's scent of strawberry shampoo and chocolate. Her phone chimed with a notification. Someone had commented on the photo of Melody she'd shared hours earlier on social media. Tamara's hands trembled as she read the anonymous message. Maybe she finally went back where she really belongs. Tamara stared at the anonymous comment, a chill crawling up her spine. Who would say such a thing? She took a screenshot before deleting the comment, another piece of evidence for Detective Rivera. The pink fingers of dawn crept through the blinds when Tamara jerked awake, momentarily confused to find herself in Melody's bed. For one blessed second, she forgot the nightmare. Then reality crashed down with crushing force. She rushed to check her phone, hoping for a miracle, only to find missed calls and messages of concern, but nothing about Melody. Detective Rivera arrived at 7, carrying a thermos of coffee strong enough to cut through the fog of her sleepless night. He settled at her kitchen table, his weathered notebook open before him. The first 72 hours are critical, Rivera explained, his voice steady and professional. This is when we have the best chance of finding her. Every minute counts, Ms. Johnson. Tamara nodded mechanically, trying to focus through her exhaustion. Someone left a disturbing comment on my social media post about Melody. She showed him the screenshot, watching his expression darken. At the police station later that morning, Tamara watched through the conference room window as Rivera addressed his team. Melody's school photo dominated a whiteboard, surrounded by a timeline meticulously marked with known movements up to 3:17 p.m. The reality of being part of a missing child investigation, something that happened to other families in news stories, felt surreal and terrifying. A female officer led Tamara to a small interview room, asking questions that started as routine but gradually shifted tone. Had there been changes in Melody's behavior recently? Any conflicts at home? Had Tamara ever considered sending Melody back to foster care? The implications hit her like a slap. "You think I did something to my own daughter?" Tamara's voice cracked. "Standard procedure," the officer replied without emotion. "We have to rule out family involvement first." By afternoon, forensic technicians filled her apartment, collecting Melody's hairbrush, toothbrush, and bed sheets for DNA samples. They bagged her favorite toys and examined Tamara's computer while she stood helplessly in the corner, arms wrapped around herself. Through the window, Tamara watched volunteers gathering in the parking lot, clutching flyers with Melody's smiling face. Parents from school, colleagues from Northwestern, members from her church. The community mobilizing gave her the first flicker of hope since the nightmare began. Rivera returned from the school, his face giving nothing away. "I interviewed all staff, including the janitor, Robert Coleman. He seemed nervous, but that's not unusual when speaking with police." That evening, Tamara sat with a social media specialist from the department, tracing the anonymous comment to an account recently created under a false name. After 2 hours of digital detective work, they connected it to an email address belonging to Elaine Mercer. "Do you know this person?" Rivera asked, studying Tamara's reaction. The name struck a distant chord. "I think she's related to Melody's birth mother, a cousin maybe?" Tamara pulled out the adoption folder she'd barely reviewed in years, fingers trembling as she flipped through pages until finding a family tree. Yes, Elaine Mercer, maternal first cousin of Sarah Mills, Melody's biological mother. The next morning, Tamara initiated a video call with Elaine Mercer, Rivera observing just off camera. The woman's thin face appeared, hard lines around her mouth deepening when she recognized Tamara. "She never should have gone to someone like you," Elaine spat without preamble. "Our family had people who could have raised her." "Did you take my daughter?" Tamara demanded, heart pounding. "I wish I had," Elaine retorted. "At least she'd be with her real family." After the call ended, Rivera placed a gentle hand on Tamara's shoulder. "We'll investigate this lead, but don't fixate on it. We're pursuing multiple angles." By the third evening, Tamara had reviewed Melody's adoption documents repeatedly, scrutinizing every name listed in the biological family section. Could someone from Melody's past have taken her? The thought had barely formed when Rivera returned to her apartment, his expression unusually guarded. "We've just discovered that Robert Coleman, the school janitor, resigned yesterday morning, and we haven't been able to locate him in the past 24 hours. I need to go to Wisconsin immediately," Rivera said, grabbing his jacket from the chair. 1 week later, Rivera's weathered SUV pulled into Tamara's apartment complex parking lot, his expression revealing everything before he spoke. The lead that had seemed so promising, Robert Coleman's sudden disappearance, had dissolved into disappointment. "Coleman is in Appleton, Wisconsin," Rivera explained, spreading photographs across Tamara's kitchen table. "Caring for his elderly mother at a rehabilitation center. Staff confirmed he's been there regularly, including the afternoon Melody disappeared." Tamara stared at the images. Coleman pushing an elderly woman in a wheelchair through a hospital garden, timestamps clearly visible. The alibi was unassailable. "He requested leave weeks ago," Rivera continued. "The timing was coincidental." That evening, Tamara sat rigidly on her couch, watching the local news coverage of Melody's case. What had begun as straightforward reporting about a missing child had subtly shifted. The anchor's voice carried a new undercurrent as footage of Tamara and Melody appeared on screen. "Questions have emerged about the cross-racial adoption and potential cultural challenges faced by the family," the reporter intoned, while displaying a photo where their different skin tones were particularly evident. Tamara turned off the television with trembling hands. The insinuation was clear. Somehow her being black and Melody being white factored into her daughter's disappearance. The next morning, Tamara's academic training kicked in. If the police investigation was stalling, she would conduct her own. She transformed her living room into an investigation center, meticulously creating a timeline with color-coded sticky notes and detailed maps of the school vicinity. 3 colleagues from Northwestern arrived that evening, answering her desperate email for help. Daniel from Information Systems set up a data tracking program, while Priya from Psychology analyzed the witness statements with a clinical eye. Marcus, a statistics professor, worked on probability models of different scenarios. The school had 23 visitors that week, Tamara noted, squinting at visitor logs she'd persuaded the school secretary to share. Any could have observed Melody's routine. While her friends worked, Tamara slipped away to Melody's school, where a handful of children lingered after classes for a supervised playdate. With the principal's reluctant permission, she gently questioned Melody's classmates. "Melody told me about her grown-up friend who has horses," a small girl with pigtails volunteered. "She said it was a secret." Tamara's heart raced. "When did she tell you this, Sophie?" "Before she went away. She said maybe she could visit the horses someday." Back at her apartment, Tamara added this critical information to her timeline. Melody loved horses. Had someone used this to lure her away? 2 days later, Tamara walked into Northwestern's administrative offices, where the university president's sympathetic expression quickly hardened. "We've extended extraordinary accommodation, Tamara, but your department cannot function indefinitely without you. Your unpaid leave expires next week." Leaving the building, Tamara checked her phone obsessively, having set alerts for any online mention of Melody. Each day brought fewer results. The world was moving on while she remained frozen in amber. That night she photographed every item in Melody's room, searching for overlooked clues. Exhaustion claimed her at 3 in the morning, slumped against her daughter's bed. Priya found her there hours later, concern etched on her face. "You can't help Melody if you collapse," she said, guiding Tamara to the kitchen for tea. At the pharmacy that afternoon, Tamara froze mid-aisle when she overheard 2 women whispering behind her. "That's her, the professor whose daughter vanished," one murmured. "So sad. They say she worked too much, barely knew what her child was doing." Tamara abandoned her basket and fled. At the precinct, Rivera showed her a dispiriting stack of reported sightings from across 3 states, each investigated and dismissed. The light in his eyes had dimmed, though his determination remained steadfast. "We're still looking, Tamara. Every day," he insisted. Halfway through their meeting, the room began to tilt strangely. Rivera's voice sounded distant, underwater. Tamara tried to stand, to ask what was happening, but darkness claimed her before she could form the words. She regained consciousness to the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room and the steady beep of monitors. As awareness returned, Tamara reached for the remote control, turning on the small television mounted on the wall. Through her fog, she watched breaking news coverage of a blonde 7-year-old girl who had disappeared from Highland Park. The governor of Illinois appeared on screen, announcing a special task force and a $50,000 reward for information about Charlotte Wilson. Tamara stared at the television screen, the hospital gown thin against her shoulders, as she watched Governor Raines pledge every available resource to find Charlotte Wilson. 300 officers, K-9 units, helicopter surveillance, resources that had never materialized for Melody. Your blood pressure was dangerously high, the doctor explained later, prescribing rest and anxiety medication, classic symptoms of extreme stress and sleep deprivation. Against medical advice, Tamara checked herself out the following morning. She couldn't afford to lie in a hospital bed while her daughter remained missing. Driving through Highland Park on her way home, Tamara's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yellow police tape cordoned off entire blocks. Professionally printed posters with Charlotte's smiling face hung from every lamppost. Volunteers in matching t-shirts handed out flyers at intersections. 1 month had passed since Melody vanished, and the contrast couldn't be more stark. At home, Tamara opened her laptop and began a new spreadsheet with clinical precision. She documented every resource allocated to Charlotte's case versus Melody's, every minute of news coverage, every official statement. The numbers told a story more devastating than she'd imagined. "This is methodical work," Rivera commented when he visited that evening, eyeing her growing documentation. "What exactly are you planning to do with it?" "Expose the truth," Tamara replied, not looking up from her screen. "My black daughter matters just as much as a white child from Highland Park." The following day, Rivera stood in his lieutenant's office, defending his continued focus on Melody's case. "With all due respect, sir, I cannot in good conscience abandon this investigation because another case is deemed more media-worthy." "That's not what I'm saying, Marcus," Lieutenant Barnes sighed. "The Wilson case has new evidence. Yours doesn't." Tamara's analysis gained attention after she shared it with Dr. Eliza Washington at the Chicago chapter of the NAACP. Within days, Tamara found herself on a video call with the organization's legal team. "These disparities aren't coincidental," she explained, sharing her screen to show meticulously charted statistics. Charlotte's case received 17 times more coverage in the first 48 hours than Melody's. The following week, Tamara sat across from Michael Chen, an investigative reporter from the Chicago Tribune, in her living room. "I've been tracking missing children cases for a decade," Chen said, reviewing her data. "What you've documented here confirms patterns we've suspected but rarely seen quantified so precisely." That evening, Tamara visited Shanice Taylor's small apartment in South Chicago. Shanice's daughter, Kiara, had disappeared 6 months earlier while walking home from basketball practice. The case had received 2 minutes on local news. "They asked if she had a boyfriend, if she used drugs," Shanice whispered, clutching a school photo of Kiara. She was 14, an honor student. The women embraced, united by a pain few could comprehend. 3 days later, Tamara stood in a small park near Melody's school, holding a candle alongside 24 supporters for a vigilia. Across town, thousands gathered for Charlotte, with celebrities leading prayers broadcast live on 3 networks. Later that night, scrolling through comments on an article about Melody, Tamara's stomach clenched at the vitriol. Why does a black woman have a white child anyway? Probably couldn't handle her and gave her back. Rivera continued his investigation, despite mounting pressure to assist with the Wilson case. He delivered a thick folder to Tamara's apartment. "Complete background checks on every school employee and recent visitor," he explained. "I did this on my own time." The following week, Tamara faced Northwestern's administration board. Their message was clear. Her position couldn't remain open indefinitely. "I understand," she said. voice steady as she slid her resignation letter across the table. That evening, the Chicago Tribune published Michael Chen's feature, Two Weights, Two Measures, Inequality and Missing Children Searches, with Melody's case as its centerpiece. Hours later, Tamara's phone rang. Elaine Mercer. "I saw that article," Elaine said, her voice softer than during their last conversation. "Maybe I judged you unfairly. There's history about Melody's biological family you should know." Close to midnight, Rivera knocked urgently at Tamara's door, clutching a thick folder. His expression was grave as he stepped inside. "I finally obtained Melody's complete adoption records. There's something you need to see. Robert Coleman appears as a distant cousin of her biological mother, a connection that was completely omitted during the initial investigation." Tamara stared at the documents spread across her coffee table, her mind racing to connect the dots. How is this possible? Coleman was vetted by the school. How did no one catch this? Rivera pointed to a distant branch of the family tree where R. Coleman appeared, barely noticeable in the complex web of Melody's biological family. He's a second cousin to Sarah Mills, Melody's birth mother. This connection was buried in supplementary documents, not highlighted in the primary adoption file you received. With trembling hands, Tamara pulled a storage box from beneath Melody's bed, removing a small envelope of mementos from Melody's biological family, the few tangible connections she'd preserved for her daughter's future questions. Inside were 3 photographs and a single Christmas card from Sarah Mills, sent the year after the adoption. "Could Coleman have been watching us all along?" Tamara whispered. "Planning this for years?" Rivera's expression darkened. "I've been researching his employment history. Coleman worked at 5 different schools in 7 years, always in positions giving him access to children, always leaving under vague circumstances." The following morning, Tamara met Elaine Mercer at a neutral coffee shop in Chicago's Loop. The older woman seemed diminished compared to their video confrontation, her hostility replaced with uncomfortable resignation. "Robert was always intense about family," Elaine explained, clutching her cup with both hands. "After Sarah gave up Melody, he became obsessed with the idea that children of Mills' blood should stay with Mills' relatives. He tried to intervene in the adoption, but nobody took him seriously." Tamara's mind flashed to a memory 4 years earlier, Melody's birthday party at Lincoln Park. A man had stood at the edge of the playground watching them. She'd assumed he was another child's parent. Could it have been Coleman, already plotting? While Tamara excavated memories, Rivera drove to Appleton, Wisconsin, for a second interview with Elizabeth Coleman. The rehabilitation center staff confirmed what he now suspected. Elizabeth wasn't Robert's mother, but his aunt. Inside her room, Rivera noted photographs of young children displayed prominently, though none resembled Elizabeth enough to be close relatives. "Robert is a good boy," Elizabeth insisted, always looking out for family. Back in Deerfield, Tamara opened an email from Northwestern's Human Resources Department that eliminated her last hope of retaining her position. "Conforme nossa política, após 60 dias de licença não remunerada, somos obrigados a preencher sua posição permanentemente." The next day, Tamara cleared out her university office, methodically packing books and research papers into cardboard boxes. Colleagues passed her open door, most averting their eyes. Only Daniel, Priya, and Marcus stopped to help, silent solidarity in their shared labor. That evening, Rivera interviewed former co-workers from Coleman's previous schools. A disturbing pattern emerged. Children who felt special to Coleman, small gifts given secretly, attention lavished on select students who matched a certain profile. He gave stickers to the quiet ones, a former teacher from Milwaukee explained. Always the little blonde girls who seemed to need extra attention. Tamara and Rivera reconstructed the timeline of Melody's disappearance, now focused on how Coleman could have orchestrated the abduction while maintaining his Wisconsin alibi. He wouldn't have done this alone, Rivera concluded, examining Coleman's phone records. These calls to Rockford, Illinois, 23 in the week before Melody disappeared, they could be his accomplice. Using financial records obtained through court order, they traced the Rockford number to a modest home owned by Elizabeth Coleman, not the rehabilitation center resident, but another Elizabeth, possibly Robert's wife or sister. 2 days later, Rivera presented their findings to Deerfield's police chief, who remained skeptical. "You've got circumstantial connections and theories, Detective. Not enough for a warrant or to reopen an inactive case officially." That night, Tamara reviewed her dwindling savings, calculating how many more months she could keep the apartment. 4, maybe 5 if she cut every non-essential expense. The following morning, Rivera showed Tamara a street view image of the Rockford house, a small ranch-style home with beige siding and, clearly visible in the front yard, a child's swing set with a red slide. The morning Tamara delivered her resignation letter to Northwestern, her phone chimed with an email notification from an anonymous address. Opening it, she found a single image, a Google Street View screenshot dated 3 days after Melody's disappearance, showing what appeared to be a child in a pink coat entering a silver Toyota Camry on a street near Wilmot Elementary. Tamara's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped her phone. The image on the screen was grainy but unmistakable, a small figure in a pink coat, Melody's signature pink coat, climbing into a silver sedan. She called Rivera immediately, her voice cracking with desperate hope. 6 months after Melody's disappearance, Tamara barely recognized her own apartment or herself. The once tasteful living room had transformed into an investigative hub, walls covered with maps, timelines, and photographs connected by colored strings. Her academic books gathered dust in corners, replaced by true crime volumes and missing persons resources. Daniel hunched over his laptop at her dining table, attempting to enhance the Google Street View image. "The resolution is fighting me," he explained, frustration evident in his voice. "I can make out part of the license plate, starts with WTR, but the rest is too pixelated." Rivera arrived after his shift ended, carrying takeout containers of Kung Pao chicken and steamed rice. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of the toll the case was taking on him as well. "My lieutenant called me in today," he confided, picking at his food. "Said my closure rate is dropping and I need to focus on cases with viable leads." On the television mounted in the corner, a breaking news banner announced, "Missing Highland Park girl found safe." The camera cut to Charlotte Wilson, reunited with her mother, surrounded by beaming officials congratulating themselves on a successful operation. The governor stood prominently in the background, basking in the positive publicity. Tamara's kitchen had become a makeshift office, her refrigerator empty save for condiments and expired yogurt. She stared at her online banking statement, the balance decreasing steadily each month. Without her university salary, she estimated she could maintain the apartment for perhaps 3 more months before facing eviction. Later that week, Tamara met Alex Jung and Sarah Patel, producers of the true crime podcast American Vanishings, at a coffee shop near her apartment. "We want to dedicate our entire new season to Melody's case," Alex explained, his expression earnest. "The systemic failures, the racial disparities in media coverage, the ignored leads. People need to hear this story." That evening, Tamara listened to previous episodes of their podcast, noting their nuanced approach to similar cases and their unflinching examination of law enforcement shortcomings. Perhaps this platform could generate new leads where traditional methods had failed. At the police department, Rivera stood before his chief's desk as a stack of case files thumped down before him. "Your solve rate has dropped 15% this quarter, Detective," the chief stated flatly. "I need you back at full capacity on active cases, not chasing 3-year-old security footage." On a crisp autumn morning, Tamara visited Wilmot Elementary, walking slowly through hallways that had once echoed with Melody's laughter. Most of the staff had changed. The few who recognized her offered pitying smiles before quickly looking away. Near the playground, she watched children playing tag. None of them remembered the girl in the pink coat anymore. The podcast recording session drained Tamara emotionally. For 5 hours, she recounted every excruciating detail of the day Melody vanished, her voice growing hoarse as she described the gradual realization that the system had failed her daughter from the beginning. Property records for the Rockford house revealed that Elizabeth Coleman, not Robert's aunt in Wisconsin, but another Elizabeth, had purchased the modest ranch-style home 3 months before Melody disappeared, timing that could hardly be coincidental. One evening, Tamara attended a support group for parents of missing children, listening silently as others described years-long searches, cases gone cold, detectives who stopped calling. The possibility that Melody's case might never be solved crystallized into her greatest fear. Rivera dedicated his day off to searching vehicle registration databases, cross-referencing silver Toyota Camrys with partial plate numbers matching what they could discern from the Google image. The task was painstaking, yielding hundreds of potential matches across 3 states. Online forums dedicated to Melody's case brought both support and painful speculation, including cruel theories suggesting Tamara might be involved in her daughter's disappearance. She learned to avoid reading comments, focusing instead on legitimate leads forwarded by Rivera. Late one night, Rivera arrived unannounced at Tamara's door, excitement breaking through his professional demeanor. "I checked toll records for the highways between Deerfield and Rockford on the day Melody disappeared," he said, spreading papers across her kitchen counter. A silver Toyota Camry registered to Elizabeth Coleman passed through the I-90 toll plaza at 5:22 that evening. The first episode of American Vanishing's The Melody Johnson Case went viral overnight, generating thousands of downloads and hundreds of tips. Among the flood of emails was one that stood out, a message from Jason Phelps, former security contractor at Wilmot Elementary, claiming he had witnessed Robert Coleman speaking with Melody multiple times before her disappearance, information he had tried to report to police but was dismissed. Tamara's fingers trembled as she read Jason Phelps's email for the 3rd time at 3 in the morning, her exhausted mind suddenly electric with possibility. Among hundreds of messages from podcast listeners, this one stood out like a beacon. "I worked security at Wilmot Elementary. I saw Coleman talking to Melody at least 3 times. When I reported it, my supervisor said I was overreacting." By 7 o'clock, Tamara had forwarded the email to Rivera, who arranged a meeting with Phelps that same afternoon. They gathered at a quiet coffee shop in Evanston, away from curious eyes in Deerfield. Jason Phelps was younger than Tamara had expected, barely 30, with anxious eyes that darted around the cafe. "I kept notes," Phelps explained, scrolling through his phone. "It's a habit from my military days. September 10th, 3:10 p.m., Coleman talking with the girl in the pink coat near the East Gate. He was showing her something on his phone." Rivera studied the dated entries, his professional composure slipping to reveal genuine anger. "Why wasn't this in the original investigation files?" "I told my supervisor, who said he'd pass it along. Later I tried telling a detective directly, but he brushed me off, said Coleman had already been cleared." Phelps shrugged helplessly. "I was a contractor, not even full-time staff. Nobody took me seriously." Back at the police station, Rivera pulled the original investigation boxes from storage, combing through interview transcripts. Phelps's name appeared only once, on a list of personnel interviewed, with no detailed statement or follow-up. Meanwhile, Tamara searched Coleman's social media history, discovering he had liked several public photos of Melody posted on the school's official accounts months before the disappearance. Each discovery was another piece of the puzzle, a confirmation of premeditation. The second episode of the podcast featured Tamara speaking with newfound determination, methodically outlining the systemic failures that had hampered the investigation from the beginning. She no longer sounded like a victim, but an advocate, not just for Melody, but for every child the system had failed. Later that week, Tamara discovered the GoFundMe campaign created by podcast listeners had exceeded $30,000, accompanied by hundreds of supportive messages. For the first time in months, she wouldn't need to worry about rent or utilities while continuing her search. The renewed attention came with complications. Rivera was summoned to internal affairs. where two stern-faced investigators questioned his disproportionate time allocation and emotional involvement in a case officially classified as inactive. "You're compromising active investigations, detective," one said, flipping through a file of Rivera's recent case assignments. "Your closure rate has dropped significantly." "With respect," Rivera replied, "I believe we have new evidence warranting reclassification of the Johnson case." That evening, Tamara received an envelope with no return address. Inside, magazine and newspaper letters had been pasted to form a chilling message: "Stop looking or you'll never see her again." Her hands shook as she placed it in a plastic bag for Rivera. Planning for the one-year anniversary vigil consumed Tamara's next weeks. She coordinated with other families of missing children, transformed her apartment into a command center filled with positive energy rather than desperate investigation. Rivera, meanwhile, presented his carefully compiled evidence to a skeptical judge, arguing for surveillance authorization on the Coleman property in Rockford. "I understand these connections appear circumstantial, Your Honor, but the pattern is undeniable." On Sunday morning, Tamara visited her church for the first time in months. The congregation welcomed her with embraces and promises of attendance at the vigil, a reminder that despite many abandoning her cause, a faithful few remained. The anniversary vigil drew hundreds to Deerfield's Central Park. Tamara stood before them, surrounded by candles illuminating the darkness, speaking with composed emotion as local media captured every word. "For 1 year, I've asked you not to forget her," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Today, I ask for more. Demand answers, demand equality in the search for all missing children." As applause faded, Rivera appeared at her side, gently pulling her away from well-wishers. His expression held something she hadn't seen in months: hope. "The warrant was approved," he whispered. "We've had a surveillance team in Rockford since this morning, and they just confirmed there's a child at the property who matches the updated description of Melody." Tamara's heart pounded against her ribs as Rivera pulled her behind a large oak tree, away from the vigil crowd. "A child?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Female, approximately 9 years old, light hair," Rivera confirmed, showing her a grainy surveillance photo on his phone. "The team has maintained visual since this morning." Within hours, Tamara found herself inside a nondescript surveillance van parked a block from the Coleman residence in Rockford. The small ranch house, with beige siding, looked painfully ordinary. Flower beds flanking the walkway, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Through high-powered camera feeds displayed on monitors, Tamara watched as a young girl emerged into the backyard, heading toward the swing set she had glimpsed in earlier photographs. "Oh God," Tamara breathed, instinctively reaching toward the screen. The girl's hair was shorter, slightly darker than Melody's had been, but something in her movement, the particular way she skipped toward the swing, sent recognition surging through Tamara's body. Rivera squeezed her shoulder gently. "We need absolute certainty before we move. The prosecutor is working with Rockford PD to build an airtight case for the search warrant." For 3 excruciating days, Tamara existed in surveillance limbo, her eyes rarely leaving the monitors. She cataloged each glimpse of the child, the way she read books at the kitchen table, suggesting homeschooling, how she never left the property boundary, the careful way Elizabeth Coleman monitored her movements. "She looks healthy," whispered Tamara on the second day, relief and anguish battling within her. "Her hair, they cut it, darkened it." The surveillance team documented Elizabeth's predictable routine: brief shopping trips to the local grocery store, always returning within 45 minutes, the child never accompanying her. One officer noted that their target had minimal interaction with neighbors, keeping largely to herself. On the morning of the 4th day, tension in the van spiked when a silver Toyota Camry, the same vehicle from the Google Street View image, pulled into the driveway. Robert Coleman stepped out, carrying grocery bags and what appeared to be a children's board game. "That's him," Tamara hissed, watching the man she'd previously known only as the school janitor embrace the child who ran to greet him. Rivera immediately began photographing the interaction, noting the girl's body language, comfortable but with subtle hesitation when Coleman attempted to pick her up. Through directional microphones, they captured fragments of conversation, including Coleman calling her Amy. Later that afternoon, the monitoring equipment picked up the child's distinctive laugh as she played in the backyard. Tamara froze, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. "That's her laugh," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That's Melody's laugh." This final confirmation accelerated the legal process. By evening, Rivera was in a conference room at the Rockford Police Department, presenting evidence to the district attorney and tactical team leaders. "The child matches age progression photos of Melody Johnson," Rivera explained, pointing to side-by-side comparisons. "We have documented connection between Robert Coleman and the victim's biological family, evidence of premeditation, and confirmation of his presence at the residence where a child matching Melody's description is being kept under the name Amy Coleman." The district attorney, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, reviewed the file carefully before nodding. "You've done exceptional work, Detective. We'll have the warrant by morning." In a nearby hotel room, Tamara paced restlessly, surrounded by photographs of Melody and 3 years' worth of investigation notes. Her mind cycled between paralyzing hope and terrifying doubt. What if the child wasn't Melody? What if she was, but didn't remember her real mother? What damage had 3 years of captivity done? Dawn brought a flurry of activity. Rivera arrived with coffee and the signed warrant. "We have 24 hours, he explained as they drove to the staging area 2 blocks from the Coleman house. "Tactical team will secure the adults first, then Child Services will accompany officers to make initial contact with the child." Tamara clutched Melody's teddy bear, Mr. Whiskers, as she waited in an unmarked police car, listening to radio communications. Her entire body tensed as she heard, "Alpha team in position, adult subjects secured, child located in back bedroom." Then Rivera's calm but urgent voice came through. "Tamara, we need you here now. She's asking for her real mother and doesn't respond to the name Melody." Tamara clutched Mr. Whiskers tightly as the police officer drove her to the Coleman house, her heart hammering against her ribs. The modest ranch-style home, now surrounded by tactical officers and unmarked vehicles, looked surreally ordinary, a stark contrast to the extraordinary moment unfolding within its walls. Rivera met her at the front door, his expression a careful mix of hope and caution. "She's confused," he warned softly. "They've told her stories, Tamara. Be prepared." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and floor cleaner. Tamara followed Rivera through a narrow hallway, where officers were methodically documenting everything. In the living room, a child services worker sat beside a small girl with shoulder-length brown hair. The girl looked up, her blue eyes, Melody's unmistakable eyes, widening with uncertainty. "Amy," the social worker said gently, "this is the lady we told you about." Tamara's breath caught in her throat. Despite the darker hair and the 3 years of growth, she would recognize her daughter anywhere. She forced herself to remain still, remembering the psychologist's instructions about not rushing forward. "Hello," Tamara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." The girl tilted her head, studying Tamara with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "You're my first mom? Before the accident?" she asked hesitantly. "Uncle Rob said you couldn't take care of me anymore." Tamara carefully knelt down, maintaining enough distance not to frighten her. "There was no accident, sweetheart. I've been searching for you every single day since you disappeared. I never, not for 1 second, stopped looking for you." In another room, Robert Coleman sat handcuffed at a kitchen table, alternating between righteous indignation and stony silence. "She belongs with family," he insisted to the detective interviewing him. "Her mother gave her away to strangers. I was just fixing a mistake." Meanwhile, Elizabeth Coleman was being questioned separately, her story unraveling under pressure. "Robert said she was his daughter," she claimed, tears streaming down her face, "that her adoptive mother was unfit. I believed him, at first." Back in the living room, Tamara gently asked, "Do you remember the song we used to sing at bedtime?" The girl's forehead creased in concentration. Tamara hummed the first few notes of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," watching as recognition flickered across her daughter's face. When Tamara paused, the girl automatically continued the melody, her voice small but certain. "You used to sing that," she whispered, a fragile connection bridging the 3-year chasm between them. As investigators documented the house, they discovered a trove of forgeries in the master bedroom. A falsified birth certificate for Amy Coleman, fabricated medical records, and school registration forms listing Robert and Elizabeth as her biological parents. Hidden beneath the girl's bed, however, was a small box containing a scrap of pink fabric, a piece of the coat Melody had been wearing when she disappeared. The social worker showed Melody photographs of her former home and life in Deerfield. "This was your room," she explained, pointing to images of unicorn bedding and stuffed animals. "Is Mr. Whiskers still there?" the girl asked suddenly, looking directly at Tamara. Tamara's heart leaped. "Yes," she managed, reaching into her bag to pull out the well-worn teddy bear. "He's been waiting for you. Do you remember how his ear got torn?" "You fixed it with red thread because we didn't have brown," Melody replied without hesitation, reaching tentatively for the bear. Hours later, after preliminary psychological evaluations and careful documentation, Melody had fallen asleep on the couch, emotionally exhausted. Tamara watched her breathing, afraid to look away even for a moment. Rivera approached quietly, coffee in hand. "The prosecutor is building a solid case. Coleman's talking now, trying to justify everything. He claims he rescued her from an unnatural family situation." Tamara nodded silently, her eyes never leaving her sleeping daughter. "There's something else," Rivera added, his voice dropping further. "The investigators found evidence in the Coleman house suggesting that Robert may have tried this before, with other children. We need to prepare for the possibility that the trial will reveal stories that Melody should never hear." Tamara felt a chill run through her body as Rivera's words sank in. The idea that Coleman might have targeted other children before Melody added another layer of horror to an already nightmarish situation. But she couldn't dwell on that now. Her daughter was finally here, breathing softly on the couch beside her, found after 3 years of desperate searching. The first days back in their Deerfield apartment were a delicate dance of rediscovery. Melody stood hesitantly in the doorway, taking in the familiar yet strange surroundings. Tamara had spent weeks preparing for this moment, removing the investigation materials that had consumed the walls and replacing them with warm, welcoming decor. Only Melody's room remained nearly untouched, preserved like a time capsule from 3 years earlier. "Your favorite books are still on the shelf," Tamara said softly, watching as Melody cautiously explored the space, running her fingers over the unicorn bedspread and examining the collection of stuffed animals arranged on the window seat. Their first therapy session with Dr. Lauren Patel revealed the complexity of the road ahead. "Melody has experienced what we call divided loyalties," the therapist explained gently. "Despite the circumstances, real attachments formed during those years. She'll need time to process conflicting feelings about the Colemans." Late at night, Tamara found herself adapting recipes in the kitchen, discovering that Melody's tastes had changed. The chocolate pancakes once beloved were now rejected. She preferred waffles instead. The hot chocolate that had been a Sunday morning tradition now made her scrunch her nose in distaste. "Do you want to try apple juice instead?" Tamara asked, quickly pouring the rejected cocoa down the sink, determined not to show her disappointment at this small but significant change. The nights proved most challenging. 3 nights after their reunion, Tamara bolted awake to Melody's screams. Racing to her daughter's bedroom, she found her thrashing in the sheets, crying out, "Tia Liz! Tia Liz!" The confusion and guilt that flooded Melody's eyes upon waking, realizing she had called out for Elizabeth Coleman, broke Tamara's heart all over again. "It's okay to miss her sometimes," Tamara whispered, holding her daughter close, swallowing her own pain. "Your feelings are never wrong." Melody's questions about the Colemans required careful navigation. "Did they really love me?" she asked one afternoon while coloring at the kitchen table, the question dropping into the quiet room like a stone. Tamara chose her words deliberately. "I think they believed they did, in their way. But real love doesn't take someone away from their family or tell them lies." Detective Rivera's visits became a regular occurrence, initially causing Melody to retreat into silence. By his third dinner with them, however, she cautiously asked him about his police badge, a small but significant sign that her ability to trust male authority figures hadn't been entirely destroyed. The prosecutor's office arranged a meeting to prepare Tamara for the legal battle ahead. "The evidence against Coleman is substantial," the assistant district attorney explained. "We've uncovered research on his computer showing he'd been tracking several adopted children before focusing on Melody." Reporters camped outside their apartment building, shouting questions whenever they glimpsed either of them. Network morning shows offered six-figure sums for exclusive interviews. Tamara rejected them all. "I won't turn my daughter's trauma into entertainment," she told Rivera firmly. Gradually, Melody began rediscovering old pleasures. Tamara found her drawing horses one afternoon, her technique noticeably improved, a bittersweet reminder that development had continued during the lost years. The first day of the trial arrived 6 months after Melody's return. Tamara deliberately wore the yellow sweater she had worn the day she discovered the Google Street View image, a personal talisman of perseverance. Coleman sat at the defense table, eyes downcast as Tamara testified, recounting the 3-year search without once looking in his direction. On Melody's 10th birthday, they hosted a small celebration with her former playmates, now 3 years older but still remembering her. When she opened Tamara's gift, a bright red coat, her smile illuminated the room. "Not pink?" Tamara asked gently. Melody shook her head decisively. "Pink was for when I was little. Now I'm big." 1 year after Melody's return, Tamara stood in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully. Mr. Whiskers remained clutched in one arm, but now surrounded by newer stuffed animals acquired since her return. As Melody stirred and opened her eyes, smiling sleepily at her mother, Tamara recognized the profound truth. Though the contours of the life they had built together had changed, the core of love that had kept them connected through those separated years remained intact, unshakable, and ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold.